Okay, I think we are live now.
All right.
Yay!
Much easier when I only see you and not a whole crowd.
Um, Let me just make sure that we are live.
Sure.
That I'll ask Tadira.
Okay. Yeah, and I see the live comment in the top
Oh,
right. So maybe that means that we're good to go, but I'm not sure.
we are live now.
Great.
So I would like to welcome you all to this special session of our um, Diplomado en Tecnologías de la Información y Comunicación en la Enseñanza-Aprendizaje de las Lenguas Extranjeras. Today we have here with us Chris Gerdin, who is the founder and CEO of Boomerang, and he is going to bring us this interesting presentation called Millennial Venezuelans Teaching Americans Culture and Spanish, One Authentic Conversation at a Time. So Chris, floor is yours. Could you share your screen with us so we can see you?
Oh, can you not see me right here?
I
Let's see.
see you. I don't know if I see if
And I
okay.
don't I don't have any slides or anything, so I was just going to speak. But I can flip the screen if you need to see me in a bigger way,
Okay,
if that's more helpful.
I'm going to deactivate my camera. That's it. Okay. I think we're ready to go.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Jesus and Teadira and everyone else on the team for letting me come and speak. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be speaking with you guys, especially after you've been so supportive and helpful to me throughout the last couple of years. So anyway, thank you again. And Jesus or anyone, I'm not sure if I can hear when you ask questions right now, but if you ever have questions or want to stop me, or if I'm speaking too fast and you want me to repeat something, I will try it in Spanish too, if you would like. But I'll go ahead and just share with you my experience personally with learning Spanish, which led to the creation of Boomerang, which is the website for this language practice with these different, our team of native Spanish speakers, which I'll get into in a little bit. And then explain just kind of how that has changed to where we currently are. So it's definitely evolved in a few ways to be what it is today, which has been a really exciting experience for the last couple of years. Um, and I've learned a lot, not just about Spanish language and learning as a second language, but just how to grow a business in a lot of ways, which has been really supported by you all and students from Universidad de los Andes. And so anyway, this is an honor for me to be able to speak with you guys a little bit more about it. But to start things off, so my experience with language, just like many other Americans, I took Spanish in high school, and I took Spanish in university for maybe 2 or 3 semesters, but that was it. My major was in business and journalism, so I did not have any really familiarity with the education side of things, or I never really worked in languages per se. But I did work in advertising after I finished university, and that exposed me to a lot of different cultures and people of different kinds of backgrounds and geographies and cultures. And so it really piqued my interest with becoming a better communicator with them, since a lot of these folks did not have amazing English, for one, and they could also express themselves better, of course, in their native language, especially a lot of them who were copywriters, so the people who wrote the different advertisements. Um, and it was always more effective, of course, if I could try and translate with them and kind of better communicate. So anyway, all that to say, I personally was very interested in figuring out how to improve my own Spanish. Embarrassingly, I was a good student, meaning that I made good grades, and I had even studied abroad in Barcelona in university for a few weeks. Regrettably, I wish I had gone for an entire semester and lived with the family. But all that to say, I could not speak Spanish to save my life. And so I went to Costa Rica before I went to a graduate school. And that's where I lived with a family. I had my first intercambio with a tico, with a local Costa Rican. And so that's really where this light bulb moment went off for me, just personally as a language learner, which I understand you all probably know a lot more about, coming from a language pedagogy and background, and you're all professionals in language education. But just motivationally for me, it was a huge lift to be in Costa Rica with this Costa Rican who wanted to learn English. And I, of course, was there to learn Spanish. And I didn't realize that it would go much beyond just the language per se, but I learned much more about the people and their experiences. And instead of wanting to nail the grammar and figure out how to better my Spanish, it really became a kind of like when I was working in advertising, a very engaging attempt at better understanding this person and the ideas that they wanted to express, and vice versa. So anyway, all that to say, I kept looking for websites where I could speak with other native speakers and kind of recreate this language exchange intercambio type of experience. So for those of you who are not familiar, there are plenty of websites out there where you try and connect with different native speakers, but they're all free usually. Anyone can join, and all ages, ranges, languages, which sounds very, very appealing in the beginning, because that sounds very pure and true and healthy for language exchange. But I quickly came to realize that it can be very difficult. Even though I was an intermediate, I think I was a low intermediate speaker at the time when I was learning on these different websites. It can still be very difficult to engage in a conversation, really know what to do. And then, of course, it's a little bit more boring, but just all the logistics, of trying to find the right person to practice with, making sure that he or she has the same objectives and kind of motivation for learning the language. It was very challenging for me to figure out how to kind of have a more personalized, efficient way of having these conversations. So while I was in graduate school, which was for business, we kept pitching different business ideas in class. And in the back of my head, I kept thinking, I wish there was some kind of website out there where I could connect with native speakers who were similar in age to me, similar in interests and hobbies and expectations for why they were learning English. Maybe it was similar to why I wanted to learn Spanish in some ways. And really just hear and kind of experience other people's cultures, even though it was through a laptop and not actually being in the country. So it really dawned on me that this can be a portal for, experiencing some small element of other culture just through a conversation on a laptop. So long story short, over the next couple of years, I was speaking with a number of different university professors, and that's where I met Teadira, and I met you guys at ULA. And fortunately, you were nice and courageous enough to accept this opportunity to connect with Sacred Heart University, which is a university in Connecticut, led by a professor who is very experienced in this telecollaboration type of method for practicing and improving your communication skills. So that was really, really exciting. And I know some students will even remember what that experience was like. Well, so long story short, we built a technology tool, and that's what Boomerang still is today, where it's a video chat platform, so kind of similar to what we're doing right now. But for those of you who aren't familiar, it has a little bit of structure to the actual conversation. And so students from ULA and students from Sacred Heart, so these American students and Venezuelan students, we would match them up based on their interests. One person may have liked Harry Potter, and the next person likes Lord of the Rings. And that could have been as simple as it was at the time. They're both available on Thursday afternoon. Perfect. So let's connect them. And so we would do that, and they would have 15 minutes in Spanish together, and then 15 minutes in English together. And similar to, this kind of technology, on the right of the screen, you could see a little bit of profile information. So you could remind yourself, oh yeah, okay, this is, her name is Cassandra, and, she's interested in Harry Potter and dancing and singing and playing guitar. And so those were kind of some icebreakers, as we like to say, to get the conversation started. But that was pretty much it. It was pretty minimal. And it was great when it would work, when students would both be there at the same time, when we had the same equal number of students, and when both students were very respective of the 15 minutes in one language and 15 minutes in another language. And not to get too down different stories, but a lot of times the American students were not nearly as as accountable. So they would try and, stay in English the whole time, or they would try and get the Venezuelan student to speak more, because usually, students from your school, from your university, were a lot better at their English than the Americans were at their Spanish. So all that to say, it was a great learning experience to see what they were talking about, why they were interested, how their confidence improved. A lot of students had never spoken, at least in the American side, with a native Spanish speaker ever. Maybe their teachers, in high school, and their teachers in university were a bunch of gringos who, took Spanish and traveled and worked in the language, but never, they're not a native speaker. So this was a very eye-opening experience for them. It's very nervous. Your heart is just bump, 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 bump the whole time, the first couple of minutes. And then usually they would kind of soften into some level of comfort. And our logic behind that, the reason why we started this whole idea, was, I was thinking back on my experience in Costa Rica when I had this first intercambio. And you guys can actually know how to dissect it a little bit better, perhaps as the language professors, but the more research I did on my own with just personal language learning, you would find how effective these one-on-one conversations are, where you're both students. You're not, coming in with an expert, where, everything that professors, of course, do in the classroom and the students do for homework and for tests and all that. Obviously, no one is arguing against that, because that's an incredibly necessary part of the language learning experience. But the feedback that we kept getting from professors was, well, this is all great, but we don't ever have time or the resources, the humans, to have them have one-on-one conversations to actually practice and kind of remind themselves and remotivate themselves about why are we learning this language in the first place, and just have some fun with it. So I know personally, and for a lot of other students, you're so nervous in front of your peers in the classroom, and you don't want to say anything silly in front of your friends, or perhaps you're nervous about what your professor might think if you say something a little bit wrong. So you're just conservative and you're shy because you want to, not embarrass yourself, and you want to make your good grades. So this opportunity to have one-on-one conversations outside of class was really the chance to fail miraculously and in a fun way, and make mistakes. And whenever I say something in the wrong tense, or I use totally the wrong word and use the correct word, then I actually, will learn something from it. And so that's where it was. Oh, here we go. What characteristics do you?
No, but that was for the end. I'm sorry, it escaped.
Oh no, that's
We can
okay.
leave that.
No problem. I know I'm rambling a little bit with my story here too, but I'll keep going, and then sure, that sounds great. I'll answer those questions then. But anyway, what was I going to say with that? So when we would have these one-on-one conversations, we would listen to them and try to help them, as would the students would have access to their own the audio from the conversations, and the professors too. So a lot of times the homework assignments for students would be, hey, have your conversation on Boomerang, and then write 2 paragraphs on the experience. What did you learn about that person? What did you learn about yourself and your own culture? And what are 2 or 3 things that you want to improve? So sometimes people would listen to the conversation and they would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe, on the American side, they would say, I can't believe I kept saying el pretérito every instance when I really should have been using el imperfecto. So those kinds of things would start to surface. But really, the goal was to make them more confident, more comfortable. The student that they're speaking with is not going to correct them every time they're making a mistake and saying, no, it's not this, it's that. So we found, for example, and I didn't know this at all before I started meeting a lot of you and your students, was, where I live now, I live in New York, and there's a lot of Latinas, of course, in New York. And usually when I would say something to them, they would say, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" But 9 times out of 10, when a student would speak with an ULA student, it's always, "Hola, ¿cómo te va?" And a student hears that for the first time, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, ¿cómo te va? ¿Cómo te va?" And they're like, "I'm an A student, I'm an intermediate Spanish speaker, and here I am, I don't even understand the first sentence." And so they have this like panic, and they're like, "¿Cómo te va?" And they kind of sit there with a blank stare, and then the Venezuelan student will usually say, "Sí, ¿cómo estás?" Like, "Oh, okay, ¿cómo estás?" And so it almost is a fun way to just get them into the mentality that they won't know everything. And of course, the idea is effective communication. It's not to get every little word right or understand every little sentence that's being said. So anyway, that was the kind of goal for these different exchanges. Where we are today, and I promise I won't be too much longer because this is where it gets fun too, is that community. Our idea was to have a community of universities in Latin America and in the United States where it was just English and Spanish. All students could be a part of this community and they could engage in as many conversations as they wanted. And while we would love to eventually get back to that idea, it takes a lot of time to build enough people to be a part of the platform on both sides, English learner and Spanish learner. And if these are used as homework assignments, which they are by all of our universities and high schools, which are paying customers now, so they've paid for this, we need to be able to deliver an expectation, a guarantee that they will have a certain number of conversations. And so sometimes you would get unlucky if you log in during a popular time and no one is there to speak with you, or perhaps you're a student that's a slacker. A lot of these American students would say, "Oh, no one's available, no one's available." And when in fact there were people available. So just for different reasons, we decided to shift currently to where the American students were the schools that were paying for this in the beginning, and they still are, and they purchase credits to be able to use for conversation with a team of, we call them our Latin American millennials, who we have now hired, and we pay them to be available on their calendar. So basically what happened when we were doing this Sacred Heart University and ULA experiment, it eventually had to end because I know you guys are all too familiar how the internet can be very unreliable in certain places in Venezuela. And even though a lot of the students were near the university or had a pretty good internet connection in Merida, obviously something might happen and the connection might not be great. So we had to end the that pilot program a little bit early, even though the students loved it when they could connect. It was just something that they couldn't, if you remember, we couldn't finish it. So that's where it took an interesting turn, because I kept getting messages on my WhatsApp. We would use WhatsApp to communicate with the students if they needed to reschedule, or if they had issues hearing or seeing because of their technology, or if they had an internet problem. I was just kind of their secretary, and I would just coordinate all these different conversations. And one of your students, Yaneza, was always messaging me on WhatsApp, and she said, "Is there any way we can continue our conversations? I miss them. I want more. I need more. I'm learning English and I want to keep practicing. I want to keep practicing." And so I felt so bad that we had to take away conversations from her, but I kept telling her, "Look, we will figure out a way to connect you with more speakers. I don't want you to finish, your practice." And so we had a few conversations too, but I didn't have too much time, obviously, just like she didn't, to dedicate to that many conversations. Um, but it planted an idea in our heads where we said, what if we just hire Yaneza, and what if we hire other students like Yaneza who are really interested in continuing to practice? They, for whatever reason, we didn't know at the time, but they're so good at this. They're really, really engaging when they have conversation, and students seem to love them, and they just have this knack, this talent for getting the other student to be confident, taking risks, taking challenges with the speaking, and they're just fun. And we quickly realized after we hired about 10 or 14 speakers, Spanish speakers, that, oh my gosh, they're all majoring in modern languages, and they all teach, on their own on the weekends or outside of the university schedule. So no wonder they're very good at this and very interested in this. And so that started to change our offering. So now Boomerang, and that's still what we are today. We are a team of 30, or more than 30 now, Latin American millennials. So everyone is between age 18 and 35 that we've hired so far. And I think about half of them are from ULA at this point. And that is because Yaneza was very helpful, not only in being a good conversationalist, which we called one of our featured Spanish speakers, part of the team, but she had very good ideas for how to coach and train some of the other speakers into becoming the best featured speaker coach they can be. And so she really helped me over this past summer. She became our director of featured speaker training, meaning that she would help hire new speakers. A lot of people, came from the school, from the university, and we do want to have a diverse, geography represented. So we do have speakers from Ecuador, Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Chile, Argentina, Spain. And so now we have a diverse group, but a lot of them came from different referrals and kind of friends and relatives and things like that. But everyone is a teacher in their own kind of respective country. And now they dedicate some time on Boomerang to have additional, income, because it is a job, but, they dedicate a certain number of hours per week to helping coach these American students. And so that's where we are today, where American schools, there are over about 35 schools right now who are engaged in these conversations, and Yaneza and many other students from ULA have formed the team of Spanish speakers. And so we've been very, very grateful for that whole experience. Even though internet will still be an issue, of course, at times, there are now enough speakers where we can send someone else on a conversation if all of a sudden, a storm goes through or electricity breaks in your town, to where we can kind of fill that void. And just recently, we did start our English team. So we do have some English speakers who are helping the Spanish native speakers side. So there's a high school and a university in Mexico that we're working with now, who's paying for the English side of conversation. And without going into too much detail about that, I did want to say, if any of you are interested in connecting your students with our team of English speakers in this new format, where they have a schedule, they choose a time on the English speakers calendar, and we conduct a conversation for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. I forgot to say that earlier. Let me know, because I would be more than happy to speak with you on Boomerang, show you how it works, and give you guys a free conversation credit for any student that wants to be a part of that. So if you want to just try it and see what it's like, or just have one conversation. I know that resources are very difficult to come by where you are right now, and so I don't want to push any sales and get you guys to pay for a bunch of Boomerang conversations. But if you wanted to see what it's like and have a sample conversation for your students, I would love to provide that for you. I've been talking a lot. I'll start answering questions maybe.
Um,
Is that helpful? Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the questions we had from the audience. It seems like your tutors, like your teachers, are quite successful on sharing with other people abroad and having these authentic conversations. What makes them so special on that part? You were mentioning Genesa and the work she was doing, but do you think there are some extra characteristics that you could mention?
Definitely, and that's a great question that we've been trying to figure out. Kind of, it's almost flipped upside down. We realized that they were really good at it in the beginning, and then it was kind of dissecting. Well, why is this working so well? Why are they doing a great job? And I had my own theories from, excuse me, from when I was learning with my first intercambio, and it was all about being patient and making the other person feel special and making them feel like they can take chances. And I know that sounds very, very basic, and it is, but perhaps harder in practice than it can be, just on paper. But a huge part of it, especially because speaking in your second language is the most terrifying, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-conscious kind of thing ever. I mean, speaking, of course, is the most kind of basic skill that, if you're a baby, you can pretty much do this too. And so it's so embarrassing to not even be able to effectively speak, that I think a very overlooked part of this is just, look, this is very uncomfortable. This is awkward. But instead of kind of running away from it or just studying the vocabulary to make a good grade on a homework assignment, or answering one little question in class, or memorizing a 5-minute presentation in front of your class and making it seem like you're really comfortable in the language. We all kind of know that once you get into that other country and you're just placed there and you have to speak in English for 15 minutes or you have to speak in Spanish for 15 minutes, it's a lot harder than that, and it's uncomfortable. And so it's how can you treat that as an opportunity instead of something to be afraid of? And so I think Yaneza and other speakers have been very successful in making them realize that this is all bonus. This is all an opportunity to practice something that you probably don't get to actually really, really dive into in a quick class, where you might only speak for a few minutes the entire semester in the language. And usually when you're speaking, like I mentioned before, and I don't know what your classroom activities are, of course. I don't want to speak for those because I'm not a language professor. But just the sheer fact that the minutes in a class cannot fully provide everyone with those one-on-one experiences where they have to react, where they have to answer, where they have to stay there for 15 minutes, and think on their toes and react more than just kind of do rote memorization. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but what I've seen from Yaneza, and honestly, we should ask her too in the future, but what I've seen her succeed in is making the dialogue interesting to the student, of course. And that's where I think part of it is the student chooses who they speak with and they see their interests. And there's a question when they fill out their conversation request form that says, is there anything specific that you would like to discuss? So sometimes they might pick Jesus from your school because he loves Major League Baseball. And so some of these universities are in the New York, Boston area. And they're like, oh my gosh, you like baseball? Let's talk about the Yankees, Red Sox. What's your perspective on that? You live in Venezuela. This is so cool that you're really interested in American baseball. So it tailors it to them in a specific way that sometimes isn't possible from a large class perspective. So Yaneza and other speakers who've become really good at this can really narrow in on what makes it relevant to the student. And in addition to that, they make sure that it's a balance of speaking and listening. So if this was an example of a boomerang session, I think it would be a terrible one because I'm talking the whole time. But obviously that's very helpful to listen in context as well. And so instead of them getting together and saying, hola, ¿cómo te va? Describa tu familia. ¿Cuál es tu favorito? And then just kind of asking all these different questions, they flip it on themselves too. And so they'll say, oh, in my experience or in my life, in my country, here's how I do this. And so it is contextually relevant. And there are, I know in the United States, comprehensible input is kind of a buzzword. But I think that's what makes it relevant for them is it sticks to something that they're interested in, and the context is clear because they've already been telling a story or describing a situation. So they're familiar with why that vocabulary is relevant to that kind of situation. And it's not perfect. I mean, we're still figuring out, obviously, well, for one, everyone is different. Every student is different. Every teacher is different. But we're still trying to figure out the best ways to provide some guidance in the conversation to where they reach different vocabulary or reach different verb tenses or whatever they're working on in class without controlling the conversation too much. And so the way we do that right now is there's a little box where a professor can type in, excuse me, a discussion topic. And so they can say one or two little things, and we have a character limit on that to make sure they don't paste a ton of questions or a ton of paragraphs, because 15 minutes or 30 minutes does go by really quickly. But something where if you're talking about, like for example, the climate change is a popular topic that a lot of American students are learning about in their classroom. And so they're learning about different vocabulary around clima. So sometimes there might be a question about, describe how your city perceives climate change. Is this political? Is this difficult to talk about? What are people saying? And so there's some kind of context to it, but we're not sure what the best kind of balance is for that.
Okay. And then we have another question which I find really interesting. What do you think are the major challenges when it comes to teaching online? Because for us, for example, it would be like first option connectivity, but after you get over that one, which do you think that you have found?
Right. Great question. And I think there's no denying that, that doing these conversations online is better than in person. Like, I would not argue that either. Obviously, if you can get something in person, if you could be in the country that's speaking the native language, how can you beat that? That's amazing. And so this definitely comes with its challenges too. And I think in some ways, even though the whole idea is authentic conversation and it's coming from a natural place, coming from interests, that kind of thing, let's be honest, a lot of it has to be, created. And so we are creating a list of questions in case the student is very shy and doesn't want to say anything. So some of it can be a little, not repetitive, but formulaic, where they have specific questions to ask beginners versus intermediates versus advanced. But in terms of the technology itself, yeah, it can be a little bit awkward in the beginning with, you have your headphones in and we're both, looking at our screen and we're not moving around. So I think it can be challenging to make them feel comfortable in the beginning. And like you mentioned, I mean, technology issues is the number one issue with that, to make sure your internet is good, to make sure your webcam is working, and there's not a delay in the audio. Sometimes there can be a delay where I say something and then I have to wait a couple of seconds and then I hear their response, which sometimes students say they actually like because it gives them an extra second to think about what they might want to say. But no, it can be hard, obviously, to recreate, the live experience. But I would flip it as well, and I would say it can be great for them to have to sit for 15 minutes and just have a conversation where they can't be interrupted, where they can't answer text messages or look on Instagram or whatever it is that they're doing. I know it's kind of an amazing, that we're even talking about that, but the fact that a student is speaking for 15 minutes, whether it's in their same language or not, is kind of an unbelievably rare thing for a lot of these students, especially the high school students and some of the younger university students, that once they get over the weirdness of sitting and talking into their computer screen, I think pretty quickly they realize that, oh, we're just having another conversation and this can be something they can be comfortable with. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
No, yeah.
yeah, sure. And yes, I mean, we are almost more a logistics company at this point than a lot of other things. And we talked to a lot of other professors when we were researching this idea, and they would say, "Oh, that sounds great, but we have Skype and we have another partner school, so we'll be okay." And if that works, that's great. But we've heard, more often than not, I know that the logistics are just so complicated. And you guys as professors don't have time to match your students, make sure they're scheduling conversation, making sure the time zones are okay, making sure there's a way to prove that they did the conversation. And so that's really what inspired us to create this platform. So they can, they offload all the logistics to us, and we just supply them with the trained speakers and with the process of scheduling that the students can do on their own. So the teachers don't really have to get too involved.
Okay.
But
We have another one. I think this one could be fun. This person is interested into knowing which are the kind of activities that participants get to do while being on the session, because as you said, like 15 minutes, it's not a lot of time, but at the same time, it gives you some space to do different things. What are the kind of activities that they have there?
great question, especially because in the future, I think there might be opportunities to introduce different activities and games, that you might do in class. I'm not sure if any of you, do role play, or something where it's, I don't know if you have the game in Venezuela, but there's a game in the United States called Catchphrase. And it's a very fun, like, party game where you have a word and you have to describe the word, but you can't say it rhymes with, or it starts with this letter, or, something like that. I think that is a cool opportunity for future kind of boomerang technology improvements. And we honestly, we haven't done any of those yet. Right now, all we've done is we provide them with the speakers, and when they connect, if they don't have any script at all, as in if they don't have any discussion topics from the professor, if the student didn't write anything when they were booking the conversation about interests that they would like to discuss, and if when they're connected, the student is just sitting there and kind of like, well, all right, you tell me what to do. When that happens, we do have a list of questions that the speakers who we've trained are available and coming up with different content. But it is always just a discussion. It's always a conversation, storytelling. That's it. So there really isn't any activity besides that. But I'd love any of your ideas about what you might do in the classroom that could translate to a session on Boomerang where they're coming up with different ideas. And I know my personal bias is towards advertising too, since I used to work there too. But I always think, how interesting would it be to share a little glimpse of a commercial for 10 seconds, since culture is so important in advertising. I might be in Venezuela and I'll see an advertisement for, some company that I've never heard of, or some company that I've heard of, and I'll be wildly confused about what it means because there's all this different, kind of nuance to it, and maybe slang or things like that. And it's fun to figure out why is that, and so with Yaneza and with Raul and some other speakers that are part of our team now, I've shown them different advertisements or, a funny picture that I'll see on Facebook with a meme or something. And I'm like, tell me what the heck this means. I've been looking at this, I've translated it, but I still don't understand what it's all about. And so that can be kind of fun for, college students and high school students, since they're, exposed to those types of mediums outside of the classroom anyway. So yeah, that would be fun.
Awesome. We have a final question which relates directly to Venezuelan teachers. No, we have two questions, sorry.
Yeah, good.
First one, we have talked about some of the issues that could be present during these sessions and teaching online. How have Venezuelan teachers solved these issues? Because you mentioned that like half of them are from our country.
How they solve the issue of like connecting with their internet?
Yeah, connecting, enabled, yeah, those things.
Yeah, that's a good question too, because I don't know if there's a perfect answer, because there still will be, some problems. Sometimes, we'll have 40 conversations in one day, and or more than that, and 10 conversations within that hour are all with Venezuelan speakers. And I get a WhatsApp message from Emmanuel or Yaneza or Vanessa, and it says, hey, excuse me, sorry about that. It says, we just lost electricity. Sorry, we can't connect. And so whenever that happens, obviously it's a challenge to reschedule and rebook. But the American students know, hey, we might not have the person that I signed up for, but that's okay. We'll still share all the information about that student in that conversation with the new speaker. But on their end, for the Venezuelans, I mean, a lot of times they just have a more reliable place that they've kind of grown to understand is the best, spot for them for the highest likelihood of good internet. So I know like Yaneza sometimes goes to her friend's apartment, and Maria Paula sometimes goes to another apartment as well. And Emma has a great coffee shop, and Jesus has I don't even know what you call it, some kind of extra internet device that he uses just for Boomerang. And so I'm not sure if we've really figured out a perfect solution, because there just doesn't seem to be one. But they've just found their areas that work best for them, and they make sure that they don't have friends or siblings who are on their same Wi-Fi connection. Sometimes I know we tried doing this maybe before with a few computers on your campus, and whenever there is more than just one or two in that specific Wi-Fi zone, it can really weaken the chances. So usually it works best when they're by themselves. They have everything else closed out of their computer. No one else is on their same Wi-Fi. No one's streaming Netflix next to them. That's the best kind of situation.
Awesome. Those are amazing advices. And finally,
Good.
we have one related to, being an entrepreneur, I think. And this one is from Carol, and she says, what advices could you give us to create or establish an enterprising initiative such as yours with Boomerang?
Wow. And I hope I could help answer some of that question. I know that's a really big one, but that would be really, really interesting. And my story too, not to get too into it, but we did go through they call them like an accelerator program, which I know is kind of a big trend right now, where these different startup companies can go through and they'll get investment from this group, and they provide mentorship. And Shark Tank is a really popular show in the States right now. I'm sure, I think it might be for you guys too, where you pitch a business idea and they tell you why you're terrible and why it's never going to work and why it's foolish. And so we had a whole summer of that, and that's what really got me exposed to this idea of just starting a business and kind of rules and what to do right and what to do wrong and that kind of stuff. So I don't know if I'm really too well equipped to answer that just yet, since we're so early in our own adventure here. But the reason why I think we've had some traction and some success so far is to make sure we completely understand the needs of our user. And so in the beginning, it sounded like, hey, personally, I wanted to create this big network, of native speakers, and they're all interacting. And I just had this, you can get crazy thinking about how cool the features of the website can be. And we did that for the very beginning of Boomerang too. We had a feature where you could follow someone and be alerted if they logged in. You could, friend request other people. So all these different kinds of things that we thought would lead to more connection, but it was really rooted in very little evidence, very little kind of direct feedback. Whereas when we talked to professors and they said, I don't care what happens, I just want them speaking with another native speaker. I want that. We can't have that so far with Skype. We can pay for some of those things. Here are some similar, companies that have done this, and here's why we like parts of them, but there is room for growth. And so it became less about me guessing, based on my own experiences, and more with our first customers telling us exactly how they wanted it to be built. And so I don't know if that's helpful, but I know that whenever I've taken entrepreneurship classes or spoken to different entrepreneurship panels and things like that, the number one reason why they say that a company won't work is because there's a misalignment of product market fit. So the product is really cool, but it doesn't necessarily fit, the market that it's looking to address. And so if you start with the problem and move backwards, that's what I've always been taught is the approach, instead of starting with some product and then figuring out, okay, who's going to buy this? How are they going to use it? So that said, my story is very, very not sexy at all. I know, and not to get into this for too long, but there's kind of this obsession right now with entrepreneurship and startups and raising money and, all these different investment kinds of stories. And we have not really gotten a whole lot of investment. And part of that was because I didn't think we could with little to show in the very beginning in terms of results and people using our technology and things like that. But another part of it was that just takes so much time and effort, and it gets your focus away from what you're doing, that it really worked out well with me in my stage in life. And I just got married 2 years ago. I lived in friends' houses. We lived after we got married in friends' houses. So we found ways to, it's a very classic, I know, kind of entrepreneur story, but our living expenses were very, very low. And so that was our way of kind of bootstrapping, they call it, to make this have time to really take off, because everything takes so much longer than expected. And it does cost more money than expected. But if you can figure out ways to, kind of sacrifice time instead of money, that was our story. So I know everyone has a different opportunity or perspective on that, but that's how it kind of has worked for us. Long answer, maybe, or maybe short answer.
Well, I think that was the final question, and I would like to really thank you for giving us some of your time and sharing this amazing experience, and for being having this whole project and involving our students, because they are even from our university, and helping them make a change and a contribution to this area of language teaching and learning. And at the same time, I would like to thank all of the people who were here with us, and the other ones will watch the recording of this because they were really thrilled with the idea, and they're really sad about the fact of not being here.
Great, but, of course.
Anyways, thank you very much, Chris. And
thanks to you and everyone. All those things you said about letting this become a cool opportunity and everything was only possible in a very obvious way now, from your help and from students from your classes too, and Teadira for taking a chance in the beginning. So all those thank yous that you just said towards me, I want to direct right back at you guys, and just thank you again for the opportunity. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay. Well, guys, we're going to stop this, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Bye.
All right, bye. Thank you, everyone.